And you'll note this clipping from Chess Life magazine in 1958. Bobby Fischer, the young United States champion, holder of the Lessing J. Rosenwald Trophy and the Frank J. Marshall Memorial Trophy, has just added another title to his string, that of International Chess Master of FIDE. This information was received from Mr. Folk Rogard, president of FIDE, who stated that the award of the title was based on the fact that he, Fischer, had placed first in the zonal tournament ended in New York on January 8, 1958. Congratulations, Master Fischer. So, International Master Bobby Fischer, for the first time. You'll note the indicator there of the International Master title, first time he's using it, and you'll note the rating, 2626. That was his USCF rating. Now, you'll also note that the last week's rating was listed at 2342, and you wonder, how in the world can he jump nearly 300 points in one tournament? Well, you can't. I believe that what they must have done to get Fischer's rating caught up to his actual strength was to calculate the United States Chess Championship as a provisional event, as if he had no previous rating. If you run the provisional formula on that tournament, you'll come out with a 2626 rating. But if you run the standard established formula, you come out with something in the 2400s, like 2440 or something. So it feels like USCF took a cue from FIDE when FIDE gave Bobby the IM title on grounds of his zonal victory. The USCF may have said, we really should get his rating commensurate to his playing strength a lot faster. That's the only way I could figure out how they came up with 2626 when his starting rating before the event was 2342. So that's my story. I'm going to stick with it. I don't see any other explanation. Who was Walter Harris, I'll bet you wonder. I could not find a published rating for Harris at the time. He was not listed in Chess Life magazine, but he was born September 28th, 1941, and he was the first ever African American in the United States to gain the National Master title. That wasn't until 1963, however, and so I gave him no title here on this game because he didn't have one when it was played. This was part of a 13-board simultaneous exhibition, and it's the only game from that exhibition that has survived the record. We don't have any of the other games. All right, so Bobby starts with E4, E5, D4. You don't see this in serious games from Fischer, but in a simul he'll play just about anything. This is called the center game, and that's accepted with pawn takes pawn, and the next one that we rarely ever see is the Danish Gambit, C3. D5 is Sorensen's defense, and Bobby played queen takes pawn, which is unusual. Usually, e takes D5 is played. Bobby with queen takes pawn here. Okay, so after queen takes D4, Walter Harris with C6. Now pawn takes D5 and queen takes the pawn. Yeah, pawn takes pawn is going to be an interesting answer as well. It does isolate this pawn, and it invites bishop to B5 check, which would have to be blocked probably with knight C6. And then, yeah, we would just keep developing normally, right? Back, 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 back. Walter with queen takes pawn. Queen takes queen. You might think about knight F3. That's more complicated. Not liked by the bot. And after knight F6, queen's knight can come to D2. And you'd probably see black follow in suit, and then you could attack that queen. And now he's forced to trade queens for the most part. I mean, you don't want to... Well, I guess you could play queen C5 and see if white will trade and save you a move. Let's go back. Bobby with queen takes queen in this simultaneous game. Pawn takes the queen. Now knight f3 and knight f6. Bishop f4. Well, I can't imagine why that would get an inaccuracy, but knight c6. Now queen's knight to d2, bishop f5, and knight b3. Bishop e7, now bishop b5, pinning the knight. Black breaks the pin with castles, and bishop takes the knight. This move gets an inaccuracy because you really don't want to let him protect his isolated pawn with a pawn. An isolated pawn on an open file should be targeted. So after castles, bishop takes knight is frowned upon. Pawn takes bishop, and Fischer castles. That gets a question mark. Better move is to play the queen's knight to d4 and hit this undefended bishop. That also hits this undefended pawn, which would compel the bishop to retreat to d7, defending the pawn. But then you could super attack that pawn with your other knight to e5. That gets an exclam. Coming back, Bobby played kingside castles. Now the king's rook comes to c8, king's rook to e1. Harris played knight to e4 here. It's not a good idea to move into a pin, and that's why this gets a question mark. The way to keep the game equal is to just retreat your bishop back to f8. But knight e4 is what was played. King's knight plays to d4 here, hitting the undefended bishop. That bishop retreats to e6. He had to do that because any other move, the whole point of moving this knight was to get out of the way of this pawn, which he plays to f3 anyway. But you'll note that if you put this bishop somewhere else, then this pawn attacks the knight, the pinned piece, and you're going to lose the knight or the bishop. You'll have to choose, right? So, for example, let's say here, I come here, and if you move your knight, I win your bishop, and if you don't move your knight, I win your knight. Bada bing, bada boom, baby. So for that reason, this move here, bishop e6, was played, and that obstructs the attack on the other bishop. Pawn f3 is played anyway, sending the knight out of the house. The bot calling for rook e2. I would have been inclined to get my other rook into the game. Let's see what we get for rook ad1. I get a star for that as well. Anyway, f3 was played regardless. Knight c5. Knight takes the bishop on e6. Knight takes the knight on e6. Now knight d4. That's interesting. That's very interesting. Knight is still pinned. So if he plays knight takes bishop, I've got rook takes bishop. And any other move, really. What did he play? He played bishop c5, pinning the knight to the king. Panda's Twitch Live says knight takes e6 looks wrong. You mean Bobby's knight takes e6 or Harris's knight takes e6? You must mean Bobby's. Right, probably better is knight takes knight, right? It's not that bad. But yeah, Harris has to play knight takes e6 here. So, I mean, you couldn't have been meaning this knight takes e6 because you don't want to take this with the pawn and have a backward pawn on an open file that I can attack. It looks conceptually wrong, says Pandez. Well, you have an attack on an open file. Let's talk about this. I mean, I can understand the conceptual side of this move. You're playing a simultaneous exhibition. You've got 13 players against whom you're playing, going board to board to board. And so you're playing moves that are going to bring you to a more simplistic position. But the concept that he's employing is attacking on the open file. And granted, black shouldn't and wouldn't play pawn takes pawn. But if he does, it becomes an easy target to go after, a backward pawn on the open file. So knight takes knight compels knight takes knight. And then Bobby played knight d4. We get bishop c5, pinning the knight to the king. Bishop e3, breaking the pin. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight. And now we have a backward pawn on the open c file that we can go after. However, white has an isolated pawn in the middle of the board. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be either an isolated pawn on an open file or a backward pawn on an open file. So c5 doesn't really help matters for black. We have rook e8, king f2, rook takes rook, rook takes rook. And that gives you a king, rook endgame. And black's only weakness is this pawn, and white's only weakness is this pawn. King f8, and that of course keeps our rook from coming to e7. Rook c1, rook c8, king e3, pawn g5. That keeps the king from coming in here. Rook c5 freezes this backward pawn in a backward position. Pawn f5, pawn b4, pawn f4 check. It seems like getting this king into the game is more appropriate. Let's see what we get. A check mark. f4 does get a star. King d2, now king e7, and that gets a question mark? a6 being called for. Rook a5. Yeah, that pawn's pinned. Attack the pinned piece, guys. Attack the pinned piece. Of course, king here, and you should be fine, right? And then you just draw. Oh, don't take it. So slick. Okay. End games. Rook a5 by Fischer. Rook c7. a4. King d6. Rook a6. King e7. Rook back to a5. King to d7. Pawn g3. That's not liked. King d3 being called for. I thought here you could attack the pawn as well. See what we get on b5 here. I get a thumbs up. Really, there are a lot of places you could play b5. This seems to be one of them. g3, king d6. And right, the bot says trade pawns here. And then they probably have to play h5 right here to keep the game level. Yes. Anyway, king d6 was played. Pawn takes the pawn. Pawn takes the pawn. Now rook back to c5. Not liked. Not liked. The bot calling for h4. Again, b5 to me is the type of move I'd want to play. I get a check mark. Rook c5. a6 here. Now rook a5, rook a7, not liked. Not liked. Rook b7 being called for. Now b5, attack the pinned piece. That's a good move. C takes b5, a takes b5, king c7. And here, white has some chances. This is a two-outcome game. But Bobby, either in his fatigue or in his hurry or whatever, did not play the winning move. He just seemed like he was conceding to a draw with this move. The move here is to bring the king into play. Get your king into the play, and it's really hard. If you play king b6 here, hitting the rook, I've got king b4. If you play king b8, I still have, okay, now I could actually take here. The thing is, my king's going to infiltrate and pick up this pawn. I could probably play here now. He dare not trade, right? Oh, just do what I said and play king b4. Yeah. Okay, coming back. After king c7, Bobby went ahead and just allowed the draw. I don't know if he is just in a cordial mood or what, but after king b6, king c3, king takes pawn, king to b4, yeah, and here king b6, and you've got a draw. King a4, king a6, pawn h3, pawn h6, king b4, king b6, and after one more repetition with the kings, h4, h5, and the draw was granted. Thoughts on taking where? Pawn takes to get g5, d5. Pawn takes where to get d5? Wait a minute. Thoughts on taking the pawn instead of rook? Oh, b takes a6. Yeah, b takes a6 should work too, shouldn't it? Yeah, that should work too. If he plays king here, I'll just grab this one. Yeah. Yeah, pawn takes might even be better than just bringing in the king. Yeah, right? So he's between the rock and the hard place. If he comes back to c6 or d6, what if he comes back to c6 or d6? Well, let's say d6 so that there's no cheap... That gives me a pure question mark here. I guess because eventually black will be in Sugthang, won't he? I didn't think it was question mark worthy, but right. He can't ever move his rook. If you ever move your rook anywhere other than check, I'm pushing my pawn, and it's over. So his rook has to stay there. No, yeah, pawn takes is a great move. I agree. Give yourself a pat on the back, bro. You got it. All right, so Walter Harris is one of the few people in the history of the game that can claim to have drawn with Bobby Fischer. And again, he would eventually become a national master, Harris, but at the time, I think he was only in the 1800s even. So quite a big Fischer to fry right there.